The autumn of 1874 descended upon the Oklahoma Territory with unusual ferocity, painting the endless grasslands in shades of amber and rust while carrying whispers of the harsh winter to come. For Margaret Maggie Fletcher, a 28-year-old widow managing her late husband's trading post at Bent Creek, the changing season meant preparing for months of isolation, broken only by the occasional traveler seeking shelter from the unforgiving prairie winds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maggie had never intended to become a frontier woman. Born and raised in the rolling hills of Virginia, she had married James Fletcher at 19, drawn by his adventurous spirit and dreams of building something meaningful in the untamed West. When consumption claimed James just 2 years after their arrival in Oklahoma, leaving her with a modest trading post and debts that seemed insurmountable, everyone expected her to return east to the safety of her family's tobacco plantation. Instead, she had surprised them all by staying. The trading post sat strategically at the confluence of 3 major trails, where the Arkansas River bent lazily through a grove of ancient cottonwoods. James had chosen the location with a keen eye for commerce, recognizing that travelers heading west to Colorado, south to Texas, or north to Kansas would need supplies, rest, and reliable information about trail conditions ahead. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly the political landscape would shift, transforming their hopeful venture into a precarious existence balanced between competing interests. The building itself reflected James's practical nature and Maggie's growing independence. The main structure, built from local limestone and timber, housed the trading post on the ground floor with living quarters above. A covered porch wrapped around 3 sides, offering shelter for both customers and the goods that couldn't fit inside. Behind the main building stood a sturdy barn, a smokehouse, and a well that had never failed to provide sweet, clear water even during the driest summers. Maggie's days followed a rhythm established through necessity rather than choice. Each morning found her checking the inventory, updating her careful records in the ledger that represented the difference between survival and bankruptcy. She maintained correspondence with suppliers in Kansas City and St. Louis, negotiating prices for everything from coffee and sugar to ammunition and harness leather. The work demanded skills no finishing school had taught her, calculating freight costs, assessing the quality of trade goods, and reading the subtle signs that distinguished honest customers from potential trouble. Her clientele reflected the territory's complex demographics. Buffalo hunters passed through in small groups, their wagons loaded with hides and their pockets heavy with money from eastern tanneries. Homesteaders arrived with tired families and worn equipment, trading whatever they could spare for essential supplies. Mexican traders brought silver jewelry and fine leather goods north from Santa Fe, while freight wagons carried manufactured goods west from Missouri. Each group brought news, gossip, and information that Maggie filed away in her increasingly comprehensive understanding of territorial affairs. The Native American tribes presented the most delicate aspect of her business. Official government policy declared them hostile, requiring relocation to designated reservations under military supervision. Reality proved far more nuanced. Many tribal members had established peaceful relationships with individual traders and settlers, conducting business based on mutual benefit rather than federal regulations. Maggie had inherited several such relationships from James, who had earned respect through fair dealing and genuine cultural curiosity. Among these was Chief Walking Bear of the Kiowa, a man whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. In his mid-40s, Walking Bear possessed the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, yet his interactions with Maggie remained courteous and professional. He spoke excellent English, acquired during his youth at the Carlisle Industrial School, though he rarely discussed that experience except to acknowledge its practical value in navigating the changing world. Their business relationship had evolved. Gradually, over the past 2 years, Walking Bear would arrive with small hunting parties, trading buffalo robes and beautifully crafted beadwork for coffee, sugar, and metal tools. Unlike some tribal leaders who maintained strict separation between their traditional lives and contact with white society, Walking Bear seemed genuinely interested in understanding both worlds. He would spend hours discussing everything from weather patterns to territorial politics, his insights often proving more accurate than information Maggie received from official sources. The chief's personal life remained largely mysterious to her. She knew he had been married twice, losing his first wife to smallpox and his second to complications during childbirth. His only surviving child, a son named Running Fox, occasionally accompanied him on trading expeditions. The boy, perhaps 10 years old, possessed his father's quiet dignity and sharp intelligence, though he seemed more comfortable speaking Kiowa than English. As October deepened into November, signs of approaching winter became increasingly evident. Migrating birds passed overhead in vast formations, their calls echoing across the prairie like distant conversations. The cottonwoods along the river shed their leaves in golden showers, carpeting the ground with rustling reminders of seasonal change. Prairie grass, once green and supple, now stood brittle and brown, ready to provide fuel for the fires that periodically swept across the landscape. Maggie found herself preparing for isolation with the thoroughness born of experience. Her first winter alone had nearly broken her spirit. Unprepared for the psychological toll of months without human contact, she had struggled with depression and despair that threatened to overwhelm her practical concerns. Since then, she had developed strategies for maintaining both physical and mental health during the long, dark months ahead. Her preparations extended beyond mere survival to include activities that would occupy her mind and hands. She had acquired a small library of books through trades with travelers, ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry to novels that could transport her imagination beyond the confines of her daily existence. A spinning wheel and loom allowed her to create cloth from wool acquired through barter, while a collection of seeds promised fresh vegetables once spring returned. The trading post's location, while advantageous for business, also created unique challenges during winter. The river, usually a reliable source of water and transportation, would freeze solid for months, cutting off one avenue of contact with the outside world. The trails that brought customers during warmer seasons became treacherous paths through snow-covered wilderness, navigable only by the most experienced travelers. Even the telegraph line that had reached Dodge City remained 50 miles away, making communication with the broader world sporadic at best. Yet Maggie had found unexpected satisfaction in her solitary existence. The work challenged her in ways her privileged Virginia upbringing never had, demanding resourcefulness, courage, and adaptability she hadn't known she possessed. Each successful negotiation, each crisis overcome, each month survived, built confidence in her ability to thrive, rather than merely endure. She had discovered strength in herself that transformed what others saw as hardship into a form of freedom. Her relationship with the surrounding landscape had evolved similarly. Initially, the vast openness of the prairie had seemed threatening, its emptiness emphasizing her isolation and vulnerability. Gradually, she had learned to read its moods and seasons, to find beauty in its subtle variations, to appreciate the profound silence broken only by wind through grass and the distant calls of wildlife. The sky, enormous and ever-changing, became a source of daily wonder rather than oppressive vastness. The Native American tribes that moved through the region had taught her, often without intending to, different ways of understanding the land. Where she had initially seen empty space waiting for development, they revealed a complex ecosystem supporting diverse life forms. Their knowledge of plants, animals, and weather patterns far exceeded anything she had learned from books or formal education. These lessons came indirectly through observation and careful listening, as few tribal members were willing to share sacred knowledge with outsiders. Walking Bear proved an exception to this general reluctance. Perhaps because of his own experience navigating between cultures, he seemed to understand her genuine curiosity about Kiowa traditions and perspectives. During their conversations, he would occasionally share stories or explanations that provided glimpses into a worldview fundamentally different from her own. These exchanges enriched her understanding not only of tribal culture, but of the land itself, revealing layers of meaning invisible to most settlers. One such conversation had occurred just weeks earlier, when Walking Bear had arrived with his son and 2 other warriors to trade for winter supplies. As they conducted business, a flight of geese had passed overhead, their honking calls drawing everyone's attention skyward. "They speak of storms coming," Walking Bear had observed, watching the birds' formation with careful attention. Her relationship with the surrounding community, though limited by distance and cultural differences, had become increasingly important to her sense of security. The nearest white settlement lay 40 miles east, too far for regular contact, but close enough for emergency assistance under ideal conditions. A family of German immigrants had established a farm 12 miles south, and their occasional visits provided welcome social contact along with opportunities for trade. Even the military patrol that passed through monthly offered reassurance, though Maggie maintained careful neutrality in discussions of Indian policy. These connections, however tenuous, formed a network that could potentially provide assistance during emergencies. More importantly, they represented human contact that helped maintain her psychological equilibrium during long periods of solitude. Letters exchanged through traveling merchants carried news from the outside world, while visitors brought conversations that reminded her of the broader human community beyond her immediate circumstances. The business itself had evolved beyond James's original vision. Where he had focused primarily on standard trade goods, Maggie had expanded into specialized items that served the unique needs of her diverse clientele. She stocked patent medicines popular with frontier families, ammunition for hunters, and luxury items like tobacco and alcohol that commanded premium prices. Her reputation for fair dealing had spread through word-of-mouth networks that extended far beyond the immediate area. More significantly, she had begun providing services that complemented her inventory. Travelers could receive mail through her informal postal system, have equipment repaired by craftsmen she knew, or obtain detailed information about trail conditions ahead. These services, while generating little direct revenue, created customer loyalty that translated into repeat business and referrals. They also established her trading post as an essential way station rather than merely a convenient stop. Her ledger books, carefully maintained despite their tedious demands, revealed steady growth in both volume and profitability. The debts left by James's death had been systematically reduced through careful financial management and reinvestment in inventory that turned over quickly. While far from wealthy, Maggie had achieved something more valuable: economic independence that allowed her to make choices based on her own judgment rather than external pressures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This independence, however, came with corresponding responsibilities and risks. Success had made her a more attractive target for various forms of predation, from simple robbery to more complex schemes involving fraudulent partnerships or forced. Marriages. Her gender made these risks more acute, as frontier justice often proved inadequate for protecting women's property rights. She had learned to project strength and competence while maintaining the social connections that provided informal security through community oversight. The approaching winter represented both the culmination and test of everything she had learned and built over the past 2 years. Weather would largely cut her off from external support, forcing her to rely on her own resources and judgment for months at a time. The isolation that had initially seemed overwhelming now offered a different kind of challenge, proving to herself that she had truly mastered the skills necessary for independent survival in an unforgiving environment. As November winds began, carrying the scent of snow and the temperature dropped noticeably with each passing day, Maggie found herself looking forward to the test. The woman who had arrived in Oklahoma as James Fletcher's dependent wife had evolved into someone capable of thriving on her own terms. The approaching storm, regardless of its severity, would provide an opportunity to demonstrate how complete that transformation had become. Standing on her covered porch in the late afternoon light, watching clouds gather on the northern horizon while cottonwood leaves danced in increasingly cold wind, Maggie Fletcher felt ready for whatever challenges the winter might bring. Her preparations were thorough, her resources adequate, and her confidence earned through 2 years of gradual mastery over circumstances that had initially seemed impossible to navigate alone. The storm, when it came, would test everything she had learned about survival, self-reliance, and the unexpected strength that could emerge from choosing one's own path despite conventional expectations. But for now, in the golden light of late autumn afternoon, she simply stood watching the sky and feeling the deep satisfaction of someone who had built something meaningful through her own efforts and determination. The first snowflakes began, falling on the morning of November 22nd, arriving with deceptive gentleness that belied the fury building behind them. Maggie noticed them while conducting her morning inventory, tiny crystals catching the lamplight as they drifted past the trading post windows. By midday, what had begun as scattered flakes transformed into steady precipitation that accumulated with alarming speed on the already frozen ground. The barometric pressure had been dropping for 3 days, creating an oppressive atmosphere that affected both humans and animals. Maggie's horses remained restless in their stalls, refusing grain and pacing nervously despite her attempts to calm them. Even her cat, Duchess, a normally sociable tabby who served as both companion and rodent control, had taken to hiding beneath the counter, emerging only for food and water, before retreating again to whatever security she imagined her hiding spot provided. Trading activity had ground to a complete halt 2 days earlier when the last group of buffalo hunters departed for winter quarters. In Dodge City, their leader, a grizzled veteran named Morrison, who had been hunting the southern plains for over a decade, had examined the sky with the practiced eye of someone whose survival depended on reading weather signs accurately. "This one's going to be a killer," he had pronounced, securing his wagon's canvas cover with additional ropes. Temperatures dropping too fast, and the winds backing around to the northwest. When it hits full force, nothing's going to be moving. For days, maybe weeks. His prediction aligned uncomfortably with Walking Bear's earlier warning about the geese and their urgent flight patterns. Maggie had learned to respect the weather knowledge of men who lived outdoors year-round, and Morrison's reputation for accurate forecasting was well established among the hunting fraternity. If both he and Walking Bear anticipated an exceptional storm, she had every reason to take their warning seriously. The telegraph line at Fort Larned, the nearest military installation with communications equipment, had been transmitting increasingly urgent weather advisories for the past week. Messages relayed through traveling cavalry patrols spoke of massive storm systems moving south from Canada, carrying temperatures that could prove fatal to anyone caught unprepared. The army had suspended all non-essential patrols and advised civilian populations to ensure adequate shelter and supplies for extended isolation. Maggie spent the morning making final preparations, checking and rechecking systems that would be critical during the coming ordeal. The well pump, protected by a small wooden housing she had constructed the previous spring, showed no signs of freezing despite the dropping temperature. Her fuel supply, carefully calculated to last through March under normal conditions, had been supplemented with additional cordwood purchased from a homesteader family heading back east for the winter. The trading post's construction, which she had initially taken for granted, now revealed the foresight James had demonstrated in its design. Double walls filled with sawdust provided insulation that would prove crucial during extended cold periods. The foundation, built on raised stone piers, allowed cold air to circulate beneath the building rather than penetrating upward through the floor. Even the positioning of windows and doors showed careful consideration of prevailing wind patterns that could affect heating efficiency. By early afternoon, the gentle snowfall had intensified into something approaching a true blizzard. Wind velocities increased steadily, driving snow horizontally across the prairie and creating drifts that reshaped the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. Visibility dropped to mere yards, transforming the world beyond her. Windows into a white void, punctuated only by the dark shapes of the closest outbuildings. The temperature plummeted with shocking rapidity. The thermometer mounted outside her kitchen window registered 15 degrees at noon, 10 degrees by 2 o'clock, and continued falling at a rate that suggested sub-zero conditions by nightfall. Such dramatic temperature drops, while not unknown on the Great Plains, created dangerous conditions for any living creature caught without adequate shelter. Maggie secured the trading post for siege conditions, barring shutters over windows and ensuring that all exterior doors were properly sealed against wind-driven snow. Her livestock, consisting of 4 horses and a small herd of dairy cattle, had been moved into the barn 2 days earlier when the first warning signs appeared. The barn itself, while sturdy, would require constant monitoring to prevent ice formation that could compromise its structural integrity. The storm's fury continued building throughout the afternoon, transforming from severe weather into something approaching a natural catastrophe. Wind speeds reached levels that threatened even well-constructed buildings, while the combination of snow and plummeting temperatures created whiteout conditions that made navigation impossible beyond a few feet. The familiar sounds of her environment disappeared beneath the constant roar of wind and the percussion of snow striking surfaces with increasing force. As darkness began falling earlier than usual, obscured further by the storm's intensity, Maggie settled into what she expected would be several days of confinement. Her experience with previous winters had taught her the importance of maintaining regular routines during extended isolation. She prepared a substantial dinner, lit additional lamps to combat the psychological effects of prolonged darkness, and selected reading material that could occupy her mind during the long hours ahead. The evening progressed with the monotonous ferocity typical of prairie blizzards. Wind continued battering the trading post's walls, while snow accumulated at rates that would soon create drifts higher than the windows. The temperature registered -8 degrees when she checked at 9 o'clock, with no indication that the downward trend would stabilize soon. Such conditions could prove fatal within minutes to anyone caught outdoors without proper protection. It was precisely at 10:30, while she sat reading beside the fireplace with Duchess curled in her lap, that the unexpected sound penetrated the storm's constant noise. Initially, she dismissed it as another variation in the wind's pattern, perhaps debris striking the building or ice forming in the eaves. But the sound repeated with a rhythm too regular to be natural, too purposeful to be coincidental. Someone was knocking on her door. Maggie's first reaction was disbelief. No rational person would be traveling in such conditions, especially not seeking shelter at an isolated trading post miles from any established trail. The storm had reached intensities that made survival outdoors virtually impossible, even for experienced frontiersmen equipped with proper gear. Yet the knocking continued, weak but persistent, carrying an urgency that suggested desperation rather than mere convenience. Setting Duchess aside, despite the cat's protests, Maggie approached the front door with a combination of caution and concern. Frontier hospitality demanded that she offer assistance to anyone in genuine need, but the circumstances seemed so improbable that she wondered if the isolation was already affecting her judgment. Nevertheless, the knocking persisted, and her conscience would not permit her to ignore what might be a legitimate plea for help. "Who's there?" she called through the heavy wooden door, her voice barely audible above the wind. The response, if there was one, was lost in the storm's noise. The knocking continued, now supplemented by what sounded like scratching or scraping, as though someone was attempting to clear snow from the door frame. The sounds suggested exhaustion and desperation that overcame Maggie's initial skepticism about the situation's plausibility. Drawing her heavy wool shawl around her shoulders, Maggie unbarred the door and pulled it open against the wind's resistance. The storm immediately attempted to invade her warm interior, driving snow across the threshold while cold air struck her face like a physical blow. At first, she saw nothing but swirling whiteness and the dark outline of her covered porch. Then she looked down. A small figure huddled against the doorframe, barely visible beneath accumulated snow that had begun forming a protective cocoon. Around what appeared to be a child, the figure moved slightly at the door's opening, raising a face that was nearly blue with cold and barely recognizable as human beneath a coating of ice and snow. Recognition struck her with stunning force. The child was Running Fox, Walking Bear's 10-year-old son, somehow separated from his family and caught in the blizzard that should have made travel impossible. His traditional winter clothing, while well-made, had proven inadequate against the storm's exceptional severity. He appeared to be in the advanced stages of hypothermia, his movements sluggish and his eyes unfocused in a way that indicated immediate danger. Without hesitation, Maggie bent down and lifted the boy, surprised by how light he felt, and alarmed by the cold that radiated from his small body even through his snow-covered clothing. She carried him inside, kicking the door shut behind her and immediately depositing him on the hearth rug before the fireplace where warmth could begin the crucial process of restoration. Running Fox appeared barely conscious, his breathing shallow, and his skin displaying the waxy pallor characteristic of severe hypothermia. Ice had formed in his hair and eyebrows, while his hands and feet showed the dangerous whiteness that indicated frostbite. His condition required immediate and expert attention if he was to survive the next few hours. Maggie's experience with frontier medical emergencies, acquired through necessity rather than formal training, included basic knowledge of hypothermia treatment. She knew that rapid rewarming could be as dangerous as continued cold exposure, potentially causing fatal shock to a system already stressed beyond its normal limits. The process required patience, careful monitoring, and gradual temperature increase that allowed the body to adjust without overwhelming its compromised circulatory system. Working quickly but methodically, she removed Running Fox's wet outer garments, revealing that his inner clothing had remained relatively dry despite his prolonged exposure. This was encouraging, as wet clothing would have accelerated heat loss and worsened his condition significantly. She wrapped him in warm, dry blankets and positioned him where he could benefit from the fire's heat without being exposed to temperatures that might cause shock. The boy's hands and feet required particular attention, as frostbite could result in permanent damage or loss of extremities if not treated properly. Maggie prepared basins of lukewarm water, carefully avoiding temperatures that were too hot, and began the slow process of rewarming his frozen appendages. The procedure was painful for the patient, as returning circulation created intense discomfort, but it was essential for preventing tissue death. As warmth gradually returned to his body, Running Fox began showing signs of improved consciousness. His breathing deepened, and his color slowly improved from the alarming blue-white of hypothermia to a more normal, though still pale, appearance. His eyes focused more clearly, and he began responding to her voice and gentle encouragement. Running. "Fox," she spoke softly in the limited Kiowa vocabulary she had acquired through interactions with his father. "You are safe now. You are warm." The boy's lips moved soundlessly at first, then formed words in his native language that she couldn't understand, but recognized as expressions of gratitude and relief. His survival instincts had carried him through an ordeal that would have killed most adults, demonstrating the remarkable resilience that characterized children raised in harsh frontier conditions. As the immediate medical crisis passed, questions arose about how Running Fox had come to be alone in such conditions. His presence at her door defied every assumption about Native American winter travel patterns and family protection systems. The Kiowa, like most Plains tribes, were extremely careful about protecting their children during dangerous weather, and Walking Bear was known for his particular attention to his son's safety and education. When Running Fox's condition had stabilized, sufficiently for conversation, Maggie attempted to learn what had happened. His English, while adequate for basic communication, became fragmentary under stress, forcing them to rely on a combination of simple words, gestures, and expressions that transcended language barriers. Through patient questioning, a disturbing picture emerged. Running Fox had been traveling with a small hunting party that included his father, 2 uncles, and several other warriors. They had been returning from a successful buffalo hunt when the storm struck with unexpected fury, scattering the group and creating confusion that led to his separation from the adults. In the blinding snow and disorienting wind, the boy had become lost, unable to locate the other members of his party or find shelter in the familiar landmarks that had been obliterated by the blizzard. His survival training, begun at an early age as preparation for adult responsibilities, had served him well enough to keep him alive, but the storm's severity exceeded anything he had previously experienced. Most remarkably, he had somehow navigated through the blizzard to reach her trading post, a journey that would have challenged experienced adults under ideal conditions. His explanation of this accomplishment remained unclear, partly due to language barriers and partly due to the traumatic nature of his experience. He spoke of following lights that appeared and disappeared in the storm, of voices that seemed to guide him when visibility disappeared completely, and of an internal compass that drew him towards safety despite the disorienting conditions. Whether his navigation had been aided by exceptional luck, superior survival instincts, or something approaching supernatural guidance remained unclear. What mattered was his survival and the immediate need to ensure his continued recovery from his ordeal. The storm showed no signs of abating, and communication with his father or other tribal members would be impossible until weather conditions improved significantly. Meanwhile, the implications of his presence created complex responsibilities for Maggie. Harboring a Native American child, even under emergency circumstances, could be interpreted by territorial authorities as everything from kidnapping to providing aid to hostile forces. The political climate surrounding Indian relations remained volatile, with recent military actions creating suspicion about any contact between white settlers and tribal members. More immediately, she faced practical challenges related to caring for a child whose cultural background, dietary requirements, and communication patterns differed significantly from her own experience. Running Fox would need medical attention beyond her basic first aid capabilities, proper nutrition during his recovery, and emotional support as he processed the trauma of his near-death experience and separation from his family. The storm's continuation also meant that his family would be desperately searching for him, possibly exposing themselves to dangerous conditions in their efforts to locate their missing child. Walking Bear's devotion to his son was well known, and Maggie could imagine the anguish he must be experiencing as the storm made search efforts impossible while time ran out for anyone caught outdoors without shelter. As the night progressed, and Running Fox's condition continued improving, Maggie found herself committed to a course of action that would affect far more than just the immediate crisis. The boy's survival depended entirely on her care and protection until the storm passed and communication with his people became possible. The responsibility was both humbling and daunting, requiring her to draw upon resources of compassion, skill, and determination that she hoped would prove adequate for the challenges ahead. The blizzard raged outside, transforming the familiar landscape into an alien wilderness, while trapping them together in circumstances neither could have anticipated. What had begun as a routine preparation for winter isolation had become a test of cross-cultural understanding, medical capability, and human compassion that would challenge everything Maggie thought she knew about herself and her place in the complex social dynamics of the frontier. By midnight, as Running Fox slept fitfully before the fire and the storm continued its relentless assault on the trading post, Maggie realized that the next few days would determine not only the boy's survival, but also the future of her relationship with his people and her standing in a community where every action carried consequences far beyond their immediate effects. Dawn arrived without fanfare, indistinguishable from the pre-dawn darkness, except for a subtle shift in the quality of light, filtering through the storm's white curtain. Maggie had dozed fitfully in her chair beside the fireplace, waking periodically to check on Running Fox and add wood to the fire that served as their lifeline against the killing cold outside. The boy had slept more peacefully as the night progressed, his breathing steadying and his color returning to something approaching normal. The blizzard showed no signs of weakening. If anything, the wind had increased in velocity during the night, creating a sustained howl that penetrated the trading post's sturdy walls and seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. Snow continued falling at rates that defied her previous experience with prairie storms, accumulating in drifts that had already buried her porch railing and threatened to reach the windows before the system moved on. Temperature readings confirmed her worst fears about the storm's severity. The thermometer outside her kitchen window registered -18 degrees at sunrise, with no indication that the downward trend had bottomed out. Such extreme cold, combined with wind velocities that must have exceeded 50 miles per hour, created conditions that made survival outdoors impossible for any extended period, even for individuals equipped with the best available winter gear. Running. Fox stirred as morning light began penetrating the storm's gloom, his dark eyes opening to focus on unfamiliar surroundings, with the cautious awareness of someone whose survival had depended on constant vigilance. For a moment, confusion clouded his features as he processed the gap between his last clear memories and his current situation. Then recognition returned, along with what appeared to be a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment at finding himself dependent on someone outside his immediate cultural community. "Good morning," Maggie said softly in English, then repeated the greeting in her limited Kiowa vocabulary, hoping to ease his transition to consciousness in foreign surroundings. The boy pushed himself upright on his makeshift bed, wincing slightly. As circulation returned fully to extremities that had suffered frostbite damage, His movements were careful but determined, suggesting that his natural resilience was beginning to overcome the trauma of his near-fatal experience. When he spoke, it was in accented but clear English that revealed the education Walking Bear had ensured his son received. "My father," he said, his voice carrying concern that transcended language barriers. "He searches for me in the storm. He will die trying to find me." The simple statement captured Maggie's greatest fear about the current situation. Walking Bear's devotion to his only surviving child was well known among both tribal members and the white traders who dealt with the Kiowa. She could easily imagine him defying the storm's fury in desperate attempts to locate his missing son, possibly exposing himself and other searchers to the same deadly conditions that had nearly claimed Running Fox's life. "Your father is wise and experienced," she replied, choosing her words carefully to provide reassurance without making promises she couldn't keep. "He knows when conditions are too dangerous for searching. He will wait for the storm to pass, then come looking for you." Running Fox considered this logic with the mature thoughtfulness she had observed in his previous visits with his father. Unlike many children his age, he had been raised to understand the harsh realities of frontier life, including the necessity of making decisions based on survival rather than emotion. Nevertheless, the conflict between rational understanding and emotional anxiety was evident in his expression. "He does not know where I am," the boy continued. "The hunting party was scattered by the wind. Everyone ran in different directions seeking shelter. I became lost and walked through the night before finding your door." This revelation confirmed Maggie's suspicions about the circumstances leading to his arrival. The hunting party's dispersion meant that even when search efforts became possible, Walking Bear would have no clear indication of which direction his son had traveled. The trading post's location, while logical to someone familiar with the area, might not occur to searchers focused on more obvious shelter sites like creek beds or rocky outcroppings. The implications extended beyond immediate search and rescue. Concerns: if the hunting party had been scattered across a wide area, other members might also be in danger, trapped in inadequate shelters or attempting to survive in conditions that had already proven nearly fatal to a young person with excellent survival training. The storm's exceptional severity could be creating a disaster that affected far more than just Running Fox and his immediate family. More troubling was the realization that even when the storm passed, reuniting the boy with his people might prove complicated. If Walking Bear and the other searchers had taken shelter at distant locations, days or even weeks might pass before communication could be re-established. During that time, Running Fox would remain her responsibility, creating a situation fraught with both practical challenges and political dangers. The practical challenges began with immediate needs like food, clothing, and medical care. Running Fox's traditional winter garments, while well-made, had been designed for normal cold weather rather than the extreme conditions he had endured. Several items had been damaged by his ordeal and would need replacement or repair. His moccasins, in particular, showed wear that suggested replacement would be necessary before he could safely venture outdoors again. Maggie's trading post inventory included some items suitable for a Native American child, though her stock focused primarily on adult needs and standard frontier goods. She found a pair of small boots that would fit him adequately, along with woolen socks and a warm coat that, while not traditional in style, would provide better protection against severe weather than his damaged tribal clothing. The boy accepted these necessities with polite gratitude, though his discomfort with the foreign garments was evident. Cultural differences in clothing styles represented more than mere preferences. They embodied identity, tribal affiliation, and spiritual significance that outsiders rarely understood fully. By accepting her clothing, Running Fox was making a Significant adaptation that reflected both practical necessity and trust in her judgment. Food presented similar challenges rooted in cultural differences and practical limitations. The Kiowa diet, particularly during winter months, centered around preserved buffalo meat, wild plant foods gathered during warmer seasons, and occasional trade goods acquired from white merchants or other tribal groups. Maggie's food stores, while adequate for her own needs, consisted primarily of standard frontier staples like salt pork, beans, flour, and canned goods that might not appeal to someone raised on traditional tribal cuisine. To her surprise, Running Fox showed remarkable adaptability in accepting unfamiliar foods. When she prepared a breakfast of eggs from her small flock of chickens, bacon, and biscuits made from precious white flour, he ate with apparent appetite despite the meal's foreign nature. His willingness to adapt suggested both good manners and practical understanding that survival sometimes required accepting whatever sustenance was available. Their conversation during breakfast revealed the scope of education Walking Bear had provided his son. Running Fox spoke English well enough for complex communication, demonstrated basic literacy by reading labels on various trade goods, and showed knowledge of both tribal traditions and white customs that reflected careful preparation for navigating between two very different worlds. "My father says I must learn all ways of living," the boy explained, when Maggie commented on his adaptability. "The old ways and the new ways. He says the world is changing, and those who cannot change with it will not survive." This philosophy aligned with Walking Bear's own approach to tribal leadership, which emphasized practical adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining essential cultural values and traditions. Unlike some tribal leaders who rejected all contact with white society, or others who advocated complete assimilation, Walking Bear sought a middle path that preserved Kiowa identity while acquiring useful knowledge and skills from other cultures. The morning progressed, with gradual establishment of routines that accommodated their temporary cohabitation. Running Fox proved helpful with minor tasks around the trading post, demonstrating skills that reflected his upbringing in a culture where children were expected to contribute meaningfully to family welfare from an early age. His assistance with feeding the livestock was particularly valuable, as venturing to the barn required careful planning and quick execution to minimize exposure to the continuing storm. The blizzard's persistence exceeded even the most pessimistic predictions Maggie had received from various weather forecasters. By noon, snow accumulation had reached levels that transformed the familiar landscape into something entirely alien. Drifts had buried fence posts and reached halfway up the barn walls, while the wind had carved fantastic sculptures from the snow that accumulated around buildings and obstacles. Communication with the outside world remained impossible. The storm had undoubtedly brought down telegraph lines, blocked roads, and isolated every homestead, farm, and settlement across a vast area of the territory. Even when the weather cleared, days or weeks might pass before normal transportation and communication patterns could be re-established. This isolation meant that any decisions about Running Fox's care and eventual reunion with his family would rest entirely on her judgment. The boy's presence in her home also created legal and political complications that grew more serious with each passing hour. Territorial law regarding relationships between white settlers and Native Americans remained complex and often contradictory, with different agencies and authorities maintaining conflicting interpretations of various treaties, regulations, and policies. The presence of a tribal child in a white person's home, regardless of the humanitarian circumstances, could be interpreted as kidnapping, harboring fugitives, or providing aid to hostile forces. These legal concerns were complicated by the practical reality that proving the circumstances of Running Fox's arrival would be difficult once the immediate crisis passed. His story of becoming lost during a hunting expedition and seeking shelter at her door might be questioned by authorities predisposed to suspect ulterior motives in any contact between races. The political climate surrounding Indian relations remained volatile, with recent military actions creating suspicion about any interaction between tribal members and white settlers. More immediately troubling was the realization that her decision to shelter Running Fox had committed her to a course of action that could affect her standing in the broader white community. Word of her harboring a Native American child would inevitably spread once communication with other settlements resumed, potentially creating the same kind of suspicion and ostracism that had affected other traders who were perceived as too sympathetic to tribal interests. Yet as she watched Running Fox carefully organizing the trade goods he had helped her inventory, his young face serious with concentration and responsibility, Maggie found that these concerns seemed less important than they might have under other circumstances. The boy's presence had transformed her isolated trading post into something approaching a real home, filling silence with conversation and giving purpose to domestic activities that had previously seemed merely necessary for survival. Their afternoon was interrupted by a sound that initially seemed impossible given the storm's continued fury. Running Fox heard it first, his head lifting from the beadwork he was repairing with supplies from her inventory. His expression shifted from casual attention to sharp focus as he identified something in the wind's noise that had escaped her. "Notice? Horses," he said quietly, rising to peer through the frost-covered window toward the source of the sound. Maggie joined him at the window, straining to detect whatever had caught his attention. At first, she heard only the storm's familiar cacophony of wind and driving snow. Then, faintly but distinctly, came the sound of multiple horses moving through deep snow, accompanied by human voices calling in what sounded like the Kiowa language. The implications struck her simultaneously with relief and apprehension. Walking Bear had somehow located them, despite the storm's fury and the isolation of her trading post. His arrival meant that Running Fox would soon be reunited with his father, ending the immediate crisis of caring for a child whose cultural needs exceeded her knowledge and resources. It also meant that she would face direct contact with a Kiowa, war chief under circumstances that could be interpreted in various ways, depending on his understanding of how his son had come to be in her care. Running Fox's reaction to the approaching voices was unmistakably joyful, his face lit with relief and excitement as he recognized familiar voices among the sounds penetrating the storm's noise. He moved toward the door as though preparing to rush outside, then stopped as rational thought overcame emotional impulse, recognizing that venturing into the blizzard would be dangerous regardless of how close the rescue party might be. "My father comes," he announced unnecessarily, his English temporarily fragmenting under the stress of powerful emotion. "He finds me through the storm." Maggie felt her own complex mixture of emotions as she prepared to face Walking Bear under these extraordinary circumstances. Relief at the prospect of returning his son safely was tempered by uncertainty about how he would interpret her role in recent events. Would he see her as a good Samaritan who had saved his child's life, or as a white woman whose possession of a tribal child created complicated obligations and expectations? The sounds outside grew closer, resolving into distinct voices, and the creaking of leather and equipment that indicated a well-organized party traveling under extremely difficult conditions. That Walking Bear had managed to locate them in such weather suggested either exceptional luck, superior tracking skills, or some form of guidance that transcended ordinary navigation methods. Regardless of how he had accomplished it, his arrival represented a feat that few men would have attempted, and fewer still could have completed successfully. Maggie unbarred the front door and opened it against the storm's resistance immediately. feeling the bite of wind-driven snow and sub-zero temperatures that made even brief exposure dangerous. Through the swirling whiteness, dark shapes materialized as horses and riders emerged from what had seemed like empty wilderness. The lead figure, unmistakably walking bare, despite the storm gear that obscured his features, guided his mount directly toward the trading post's entrance. The war chief's appearance shocked her, despite her general familiarity with his impressive physical presence. The storm had coated him with ice and snow that transformed him into something approaching a mythical figure, while his horse showed signs of the extreme effort required to travel through conditions that should have made movement impossible. Behind him, she could make out at least 4 other riders, all showing similar evidence of their struggle against the elements. Walking Bear dismounted with fluid grace despite the adverse conditions, his movements suggesting reserves of strength and determination that had carried him through an ordeal that would have defeated most men. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly despite the wind, pitched in the tone of someone accustomed to command, but tempered by relief and gratitude. "My son is here," he stated, rather than asked, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that seemed to look directly into her soul. "Yes," Maggie replied, stepping aside to allow him entry, while gesturing for the other riders to bring their horses to the shelter of her barn. "He is safe and well. Come inside where it's warm." Walking Bear entered her trading post with the bearing of someone who had faced the storm's worst fury and emerged victorious, though not without cost. Ice had formed in his hair and eyebrows, while his traditional winter clothing showed signs of the extreme conditions he had endured. Most remarkably, his eyes held an expression she had never seen before during their previous business interactions. Vulnerability mixed with fierce paternal love that had driven him to attempt what others would have considered impossible. The reunion between father and son transcended cultural and language barriers, revealing the universal bond between parent and child that existed regardless of race or circumstance. Running Fox launched himself into his father's arms with uninhibited joy, speaking rapidly in Kiowa while Walking Bear held him close, his usual stoic composure giving way to open emotion as he confirmed his child's safety through touch and sight. For several minutes, they remained locked in embrace while speaking words of relief, explanation, and affection in their native language. Maggie watched from a respectful distance, understanding that she was witnessing something sacred and private, despite occurring in her home. The intensity of their reunion spoke to the depth of fear Walking Bear had experienced and the magnitude of relief he felt at finding his son alive and unharmed. When the initial emotional intensity subsided, Walking Bear turned his attention to Maggie with an expression that combined gratitude, respect, and something else she couldn't immediately identify. His usual formal courtesy had been replaced by something more personal and direct, as though their relationship had fundamentally changed through the circumstances that had brought them together under such extraordinary conditions. "You saved my son's life," he said simply, his words carrying weight that went far beyond mere politeness. "The storm would have killed him if you had not opened your door." "Anyone would have done the same," Maggie replied, though she knew this wasn't necessarily true. Many frontier dwellers would have been reluctant to shelter a Native American child regardless of the circumstances, particularly given the current tensions between races in the territory. Walking Bear studied her face with the intensity she had learned to associate with his most serious communications. "No," he said quietly, "not anyone. Many would have seen a Kiowa child and closed their door. You saw a child in need and opened yours. This is not a small thing." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the other members of Walking Bear's party, who had secured their horses and sought shelter from the continuing storm. Maggie recognized two of them as warriors who had accompanied Walking Bear on previous trading expeditions, while the others were unfamiliar but clearly men of status within the tribal hierarchy based on their equipment and bearing. Their presence transformed her modest trading post into something approaching a military encampment, with experienced fighters who had just completed an extraordinary rescue mission under conditions that had tested their skills and endurance to the limit. Yet despite their obvious capability and the weapons they carried, their attitude toward her remained respectful and appreciative rather than threatening or suspicious. As the afternoon progressed and the storm continued its relentless assault, outside, Maggie found herself hosting an unprecedented gathering that bridged cultural divides in ways she had never imagined possible. The warriors shared her fire, accepted her food, and included her in conversations that revealed perspectives on frontier life, weather patterns, and survival strategies that expanded her understanding of the world she inhabited. Most significantly, she began to understand that Walking Bear's successful navigation through the storm to locate her trading post represented more than exceptional skill or fortunate guesswork. His explanation of how he had found them revealed a combination of traditional tracking knowledge, spiritual guidance that she didn't fully comprehend, and determination that had driven him to attempt what others had advised was suicidal folly. "The storm spirit spoke to me," he explained when she asked how he had located them in such conditions. "They showed me the path to where my son waited safely. But first, I had to prove my willingness to face death for his life." Whether his navigation had been aided by supernatural forces, exceptional intuition, or simply superior knowledge of the terrain remained unclear. What mattered was that he had succeeded against overwhelming odds, reuniting their family while establishing a debt of gratitude that would fundamentally alter their relationship, regardless of how either of them might prefer to manage future interactions. As evening approached and the storm showed its first signs of potentially weakening, Maggie realized that the next phase of this extraordinary experience was about to begin. Walking Bear and his party would remain until travel became safe, creating an extended period of cohabitation that would test her ability to serve as hostess to guests whose cultural expectations and social patterns differed significantly from her own experience. More importantly, she sensed that Walking Bear's gratitude for his son's rescue carried implications that extended far beyond simple appreciation. The intensity of his relief and the formal way he had acknowledged her role suggested that she had unknowingly entered into a relationship with obligations and opportunities that she didn't yet fully understand. The storm had brought more than just a lost child to her door. It had brought the beginning of a connection that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between worlds in the complex social landscape of the frontier. The storm finally exhausted itself on the fourth day, leaving behind a transformed landscape that bore little resemblance to the familiar prairie Maggie had known. Snow drifts towered 15 feet high in places, sculpted by wind into fantastic formations that turned ordinary landmarks into alien monuments. The temperature had stabilized at a brutal -25 degrees, creating conditions that made even brief outdoor exposure dangerous without proper preparation. During the 3 days of enforced cohabitation, an extraordinary dynamic had developed within the trading post. Walking Bear and his 4 warriors had transformed Maggie's modest home into something approaching a cultural embassy, where 2 vastly different worlds found common ground through shared necessity and mutual respect. The experience had challenged every assumption she held about tribal white relations, while revealing depths of character in both herself and her unexpected guests that surprised everyone involved. The warriors, initially formal and somewhat distant, despite their gratitude, had gradually relaxed their ceremonial politeness as they recognized Maggie's genuine interest in their perspectives and customs. Grey Wolf, Walking Bear's brother and second-in-command of their band, possessed a dry humor that emerged during long evening conversations around the fireplace. Swifthorse, barely 20 but already recognized as an exceptional tracker, demonstrated traditional games that kept Running Fox entertained while teaching Maggie basic principles of Kiowa child-rearing. Most remarkably, Old Singing Crow, the group's elder and spiritual advisor, had begun sharing stories that provided glimpses into Kiowa cosmology and traditional wisdom. His narratives, translated by Walking Bear when necessary, revealed a sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena, human psychology, and ethical principles that challenged common stereotypes about savage intelligence and morality. These exchanges had profound effects on Maggie's worldview. Her education in Virginia, while excellent by contemporary standards, had provided limited exposure to non-European philosophical traditions. The Kiowa perspectives on topics ranging from weather prediction to conflict resolution offered intellectual frameworks that complemented rather than contradicted her existing knowledge, suggesting possibilities for cultural synthesis that most frontier residents never considered. Walking Bear himself had revealed layers of complexity that their previous business relationship had only hinted at. Beyond his obvious leadership capabilities and diplomatic skills lay a profound intelligence that had absorbed lessons from multiple cultural traditions while maintaining strong roots in his own heritage. His ability to navigate between worlds reflected not opportunistic adaptation, but genuine synthesis of different knowledge systems into a coherent personal philosophy. Their conversations, which extended deep into each night while the storm raged outside, covered topics that ranged from practical matters like trade route security to abstract questions about the nature of justice, family obligation, and spiritual responsibility. Maggie found herself intellectually stimulated in ways she hadn't experienced since her husband's death, engaging with ideas and perspectives that challenged her assumptions while expanding her understanding of human possibility. More troubling were the undercurrents she sensed but couldn't quite interpret. Walking Bear's attention to her welfare extended beyond politeness or even gratitude, manifesting in small gestures and considerations that suggested deeper interest than their circumstances alone could explain. His observations about her character, capabilities, and situation revealed careful study that predated his son's rescue, as though he had been evaluating her for purposes she couldn't identify. The warrior's behavior also carried subtle implications that puzzled her. Their respect seemed to go beyond appreciation for her hospitality, incorporating elements of deference typically reserved for individuals of high status within their own social hierarchy. When Grey Wolf addressed her as sister rather than using her name, or when Swifthorse sought her opinion on matters unrelated to their immediate situation, she sensed recognition of a role she hadn't consciously assumed. Running Fox served as an inadvertent interpreter of these cultural nuances through his innocent observations and questions. His comment that "Father speaks of you when you are not present," or his casual mention that the council knows about the woman who saves children, suggested that her reputation within the Kiowa community extended far beyond her direct interactions with Walking Bear's trading parties. On the morning of the 5th day, as crystalline sunshine revealed the storm's devastation across miles of pristine wilderness, practical considerations demanded attention that had been deferred during the emergency. The trading post's livestock had survived the ordeal in good condition, though the barn required repairs where wind pressure had loosened several boards. More critically, her food supplies had been severely depleted by feeding 6 additional people for nearly a week, creating shortages that could prove problematic if normal supply lines remained disrupted for extended periods. Walking Bear and His warriors prepared for departure with the efficiency of men accustomed to rapid transitions between rest and travel. Their horses, while showing signs of their ordeal, appeared capable of making the journey back to the main Kiowa encampment, located approximately 30 miles northwest of the trading post in a sheltered valley that provided protection from the worst prairie weather. Yet as departure preparations progressed, Maggie detected reluctance in Walking Bear's manner that went beyond normal caution about travel conditions. His frequent glances toward her and his son, combined with extended private conversations with his brother, suggested internal conflict about leaving that transcended practical concerns about weather or trail safety. The source of his hesitation became clear during a private conversation that occurred while the other warriors loaded their gear and prepared the horses for travel. Walking Bear approached her with the formal bearing she had learned to associate with his most serious communications, his expression carrying weight that immediately commanded her full attention. "There are matters we must discuss before I return to my people," he began, his English more careful and precise than usual. "The debt I owe you for my son's life creates obligations that cannot be ignored or delayed." Maggie felt a flutter of apprehension at his tone and choice of words. Her experience with various cultural traditions suggested that concepts of debt and obligation often carried implications that transcended simple gratitude, particularly in societies where honor and reciprocity played central roles in social organization. "You owe me nothing," she replied carefully. "I did what anyone with a conscience would do. Your son needed help and I provided it. No debt exists between us." Walking Bear's expression suggested that her disclaimer, while appreciated, failed to address the cultural reality of their situation. "Among my people, the saving of a child's life creates bonds that cannot be dismissed through words. You gave my son back his future. This gift demands recognition and response." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Grey Wolf, whose expression carried urgency that immediately drew Walking Bear's attention. The two men engaged in rapid conversation in Kiowa, their tones suggesting the discussion of important news that required immediate consideration. When they finished, Walking Bear's demeanor had shifted noticeably, incorporating elements of concern that hadn't been present moments earlier. "Riders approach from the east," he explained to Maggie. "My brother's eyes are sharp, and he recognizes them as cavalry from Fort Larned. They come quickly, despite the dangerous conditions." The implications struck Maggie immediately. Military patrols rarely ventured out in such weather unless driven by urgent necessity, and their destination could only be her trading post, given the absence of other significant landmarks in the immediate area. Their arrival while Walking Bear and his warriors remained present created a potentially explosive situation that could endanger everyone involved. Federal policy regarding unauthorized contact between tribal members and white civilians remained ambiguous and subject to interpretation by individual commanders, many of whom regarded any such interaction with suspicion. The presence of armed Kiowa warriors at a white woman's trading post, regardless of the humanitarian circumstances that had brought them together, could be construed as everything from hostage-taking to conspiracy against government interests. More immediately dangerous was the possibility that the approaching soldiers might interpret the situation as requiring military intervention, leading to confrontation between two groups of armed men whose different perspectives on recent events could easily escalate into violence. Walking Bear and his warriors had committed no crime and posed no threat, but their mere presence might be sufficient to trigger aggressive action from cavalry officers trained to view all tribal members as potential hostiles. Walking Bear assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions under pressure. His warriors were outnumbered and far from their main band, while engagement with federal troops would create political complications that could affect his entire people regardless of the fight's outcome. Yet retreat might appear suspicious and could expose them to pursuit across terrain that favored the cavalry's superior numbers and equipment. "How long before they arrive?" Maggie asked, her mind racing through possible approaches to the crisis. "Perhaps 1 hour," Grey Wolf replied in accented English. "They move slowly because of snow, but they come with purpose." The limited time available for planning meant that whatever strategy they adopted would need to be simple and easily executed under stress. Complex deceptions or elaborate explanations would likely fail under the scrutiny of suspicious military officers, while any approach that appeared to conceal important information could make the situation worse rather than better. Maggie found herself assuming a leadership role that she had never sought, but that circumstances seemed to demand. Her position as the trading post's owner and the only person present with established relationships in both communities made her the natural mediator between potentially hostile forces. The responsibility was daunting, but the alternative could be catastrophic for everyone involved. "We need to control how they interpret what they find here," she said, thinking aloud while formulating an approach that might diffuse the tension. "If they arrive expecting trouble and find armed warriors in my home, their assumptions could lead to violence before anyone has a chance to explain." Walking Bear nodded grimly. "And if we flee now, they will assume guilt and pursue us. Either path leads to conflict that serves no one's interests." The solution, when it emerged through their hasty consultation, required courage and careful timing that left little margin for error. Walking Bear and his warriors would remain at the trading post, but would store their weapons in the barn, presenting themselves as guests rather than potential threats. Maggie would greet the cavalry patrol alone, explaining the situation from her perspective as a grateful hostess, before introducing them to her visitors under controlled circumstances. The plan's success depended largely on the cavalry commander's personality and preconceptions about Indian relations. A reasonable officer might accept their explanation and appreciate the humanitarian nature of recent events. An aggressive or suspicious commander could reject their account and create confrontation despite their peaceful intentions. As the approaching riders became visible across the snow-covered prairie, Maggie felt the weight of responsibility for decisions that could affect far more than just the immediate participants. Walking Bear's safety and that of his warriors depended on her ability to present their story convincingly, while her own future in the territory could be jeopardized if military authorities concluded that she had acted improperly in her interactions with tribal members. The cavalry patrol, when it finally arrived at the trading post, proved to consist of 12 soldiers led by a young lieutenant, whose bearing suggested both military competence and the kind of aggressive certainty that could make negotiation difficult. Lieutenant Anderson, as he introduced himself, possessed the ramrod posture and clipped speech patterns of a recent West Point graduate eager to prove himself in frontier service. His initial approach to Maggie was professionally courteous, but carried undertones of suspicion that suggested he had been briefed to expect potential problems at her establishment. His questions about her welfare and recent activities probed carefully for inconsistencies that might indicate coercion or deception, while his eyes constantly surveyed the trading post's exterior for signs of unusual activity. "We received reports of smoke from your chimney throughout the recent storm," he explained when she inquired about the patrol's purpose. "Given the severity of the weather, Command wanted to ensure your safety and investigate any unusual circumstances that might require military attention." The explanation sounded plausible enough, though Maggie suspected that additional factors had motivated the patrol's dangerous journey through post-storm conditions. Recent tensions between tribal groups and territorial authorities had created heightened sensitivity to any interactions that might indicate cooperation or communication between potential adversaries. "I appreciate the Army's concern for civilian welfare," she replied carefully, "though as you can see, I weathered the storm successfully. However, you should know that I currently have guests who sought shelter during the blizzard." Lieutenant Anderson's expression sharpened immediately. "What kind of guests?" "Kiowa warriors led by Chief Walking Bear," Maggie said, watching his reaction carefully. "His son became separated from a hunting party during the storm and nearly died of exposure before reaching my door. The chief and his men came searching for the boy and remained until travel became safe again." The lieutenant's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm before military discipline reasserted control over his reflexes. His eyes darted toward the trading post's windows and door, calculating threat levels and tactical options with the automatic responses of someone trained to expect danger in every situation involving tribal contact. "Are you being held against your will?" he asked directly, his voice carrying the kind of intensity that suggested predetermined assumptions about her situation. "Certainly not," Maggie replied firmly. "Chief Walking Bear and his men have been exemplary guests who helped me maintain the trading post during the emergency. Their presence probably saved my life by providing assistance with tasks that would have been dangerous to attempt alone in such conditions." Before the lieutenant could respond, Walking Bear emerged from the trading post with the calm dignity that had characterized his approach to every crisis Maggie had witnessed. His appearance immediately heightened the tension, as several soldiers shifted positions to improve their tactical advantages while hands moved closer to weapons despite the absence of any overtly threatening behavior. Walking Bear's bearing demonstrated the kind of leadership presence that commanded respect regardless of cultural context. He approached the cavalry patrol with neither deference nor aggression, presenting himself as an equal participant in diplomatic exchange rather than a supplicant or adversary. When he spoke, his English was formal and precise, calculated to establish his education and intelligence rather than conforming to stereotypical expectations about savage communication. "Lieutenant Anderson," he said, somehow having learned the officer's name through observation or intuition. "I am the Walking Bear of the Kiowa. This woman saved my son's life during the great storm. We came to take him home safely." The simple directness of his statement, combined with his obvious education and dignity, clearly challenged whatever preconceptions the lieutenant had brought to the encounter. Instead of the hostile or primitive behavior that military briefings often led officers to expect from tribal leaders, he faced someone whose bearing and intelligence demanded respect, regardless of racial prejudices. "We had no reports of missing tribal members," Lieutenant Anderson replied cautiously, trying to maintain official authority while processing information that didn't fit his prepared framework for handling such situations. The storm scattered. "Our hunting party," Walking Bear explained patiently. "My son became lost and nearly died before finding shelter here. Mrs. Fletcher showed great courage in opening her door to a stranger in such conditions." Running Fox chose that moment to appear in the doorway, his presence serving as living evidence of the humanitarian crisis that had brought them together. The boy's obvious health and the trust he displayed toward both Maggie and the soldiers helped diffuse some of the tension that had characterized the initial confrontation. Lieutenant Anderson studied the scene before him with the careful attention of someone trying to reconcile official expectations with observed reality. His training had prepared him to deal with hostile Indians, captivity situations, and various forms of frontier conflict. He had not been prepared for a scenario involving voluntary cooperation between races based on mutual respect and shared humanitarian values. The conversation that followed revealed the complexity of implementing federal Indian policy at the ground level, where abstract regulations encountered human situations that defied simple categorization. Walking Bear's articulate explanations and Maggie's obvious well-being made it difficult for the lieutenant to identify any violations of law or policy, yet the situation's unusual nature created uncertainty about proper military response. More problematically, the lieutenant's report would need to explain why he had found armed tribal warriors at a white woman's trading post without taking action to separate them or investigate potential security threats. His superiors would expect either evidence of problems requiring intervention or clear justification for his decision to allow the situation to continue without military supervision. The resolution, when it came, reflected the kind of practical compromise that often characterized frontier governance, despite official policies that presumed clear distinctions between competing interests. Lieutenant Anderson accepted Walking Bear's explanation and Maggie's testimony about recent events, but requested that any future contact between them be reported to military authorities to ensure compliance with federal regulations governing Indian relations. This requirement, while creating potential complications for future interactions, provided the lieutenant with documentary justification for his restraint, while establishing a framework for monitoring relationships that might otherwise cause suspicion among his superiors. Both Walking Bear and Maggie agreed to the reporting requirement, recognizing its value in preventing future misunderstandings that could prove more dangerous than the current diplomatic inconvenience. As the cavalry patrol prepared to depart, having determined that no immediate military intervention was required, Maggie realized that the crisis had fundamentally altered her relationship with Walking Bear and his people. What had begun as a simple business connection had evolved through shared danger and mutual assistance into something approaching genuine alliance, with obligations and opportunities that extended far beyond commercial transactions. The lieutenant's final words before departure carried implications that would affect every aspect of her future operations. Mrs. Fletcher, your humanitarian actions are commendable, but I must advise caution in your dealings with tribal members. The political situation remains volatile, and actions that might seem innocent could be misinterpreted by those who don't understand your motivations. The warning was both appreciated and troubling, highlighting the precarious position she occupied as someone who had chosen to bridge cultural divides in a climate of increasing racial tension. Her decision to save Running Fox's life had been instinctive and morally necessary, but its consequences were rippling outward in ways that would test her courage and judgment for months or years to come. As the soldiers disappeared across the snow-covered prairie, Walking Bear approached her with an expression that combined gratitude, respect, and something deeper that she was only beginning to recognize. The crisis had revealed aspects of his character that their previous interactions had only hinted at, while demonstrating his assessment of her own capabilities and principles under extreme pressure. "You defended us to your own soldiers," he observed quietly. "This was not necessary for your safety, but you chose truth over convenience. Such courage is rare in any people." The simple statement carried implications that reached far beyond the immediate situation, suggesting that her actions had been evaluated against standards she didn't fully understand, but had apparently met in ways that mattered deeply to him and his culture. The realization was both humbling and slightly frightening, as it indicated that decisions she had made instinctively were being interpreted within frameworks of obligation and expectation that could shape her future in unpredictable ways. 3 weeks after the cavalry patrol's departure, as February's harsh grip on the territory began showing its first tentative signs of loosening, Walking Bear returned to the trading post alone. His arrival coincided with the season's first genuine thaw, when afternoon temperatures climbed above freezing long enough to create rivulets of meltwater that carved temporary channels through the accumulated snow. The sound of running water, absent for months, provided a counterpoint to his horse's hoofbeats as he approached across ground that had begun revealing patches of brown earth beneath its white covering. Maggie watched his approach from her front porch, where she had been, taking advantage of the milder weather to assess winter's damage to her buildings and equipment. His solitary arrival puzzled her, as previous visits had always included at least one companion, usually Grey Wolf or another trusted warrior. The absence of his usual escort suggested either urgent business that required discretion or personal matters that transcended normal diplomatic protocols. Walking Bear's bearing, as he dismounted and secured his horse, differed markedly from his typical demeanor during trading expeditions. The careful courtesy that usually characterized their interactions had been replaced by something more direct and purposeful, as though he had come to address matters that could no longer be postponed or approached through indirect communication. His expression, while not unfriendly, carried the weight of serious intention that immediately commanded her attention. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, using her formal name despite the intimacy that had developed during their shared ordeal. "I come to speak with you about matters that cannot be discussed in the presence of others." The statement's gravity struck her immediately. In all their previous interactions, Walking Bear had maintained the diplomatic formality appropriate to intercultural business relationships, never suggesting that personal or private communications might be necessary or appropriate between them. His request for private audience indicated a fundamental shift in how he viewed their relationship and its potential future development. "Of course," she replied, gesturing toward the trading post's interior. "Please come inside where we can speak comfortably." They settled in the main room, where the fire she had built that morning provided warmth against the lingering winter chill, while afternoon light filtered through windows that no longer required constant cleaning of frost and snow. The familiar setting, scene of so many previous conversations, somehow felt different under the weight of Walking Bear's obvious, serious purpose. He began with traditional courtesy, inquiring about her health and business prospects, accepting the coffee she offered, and commenting on the weather's gradual improvement. Yet beneath these conventional exchanges, Maggie sensed anticipation and nervous energy that suggested more significant communications to follow. His careful attention to her responses and his frequent glances around the trading post's interior seemed to indicate assessment or evaluation rather than casual conversation. "My son speaks of you often," Walking Bear said, when the preliminary courtesies had been exhausted. "He tells the other children about the woman who saved him from the storm, who fed him strange food that became delicious, who taught him new ways of staying warm and safe." The observation pleased Maggie, though. She wondered about its relevance to whatever serious business had brought him to her door. Running Fox's adaptation to her care during the crisis had been remarkable, suggesting resilience and intelligence that reflected credit on his upbringing and natural character. "Running Fox is an exceptional child," she replied. "His courage during the storm and his willingness to adapt to unfamiliar circumstances showed remarkable maturity for someone his age." "Yes," Walking Bear agreed, then paused significantly. "But there is more. He tells me things that reveal your character in ways you perhaps do not realize." This statement created mild apprehension as Maggie wondered what aspects of their interaction a child might have observed and reported that could be significant enough to warrant special mention. Her care for Running Fox had been instinctive and practical, driven by humanitarian concern rather than any conscious effort to impress his father or demonstrate particular qualities. Walking Bear continued without waiting for her response. He says you sang to him when he was frightened by the storm's noise. He says you shared your own blanket when you thought he was still cold. He says you spoke to him as though he were your own son, with patience and kindness, even when he could not understand your words. The specific details surprised her, as she hadn't realized how carefully the boy had observed and interpreted her actions during their time together. Her behavior toward him had been natural and unconscious, reflecting instincts and values that she hadn't consciously examined or intended as communications to his father. He also says, Walking Bear added, his tone becoming more serious, that you stood between him and soldiers who might have taken him away, that you spoke for him when he could not speak for himself, that you risked displeasure from your own people to protect a Kiowa child. This observation struck closer to issues that had troubled Maggie's conscience since the cavalry patrol's visit. Her decision to defend Walking Bear and his warriors to Lieutenant Anderson had been instinctive, but its implications continued rippling through her relationship with the broader white community. Word of her Indian sympathies had inevitably spread, creating subtle but noticeable changes in how other settlers and traders interacted with her. Running Fox needed protection, she said simply. I couldn't stand by and watch him be treated unfairly because of his race. Walking Bear nodded slowly, as though her response confirmed expectations or assumptions he had formed about her character. This is what my son told me. This is what I hope to hear you say. The conversation paused, while Walking Bear seemed to gather his thoughts for whatever communication would follow. His careful preparation and obvious nervousness suggested that he was approaching a topic of considerable personal significance, something that required courage to address and might fundamentally alter their relationship, regardless of her response. Among my people, he began carefully, there are traditions about debts of honor that cannot be repaid through ordinary means. When someone saves a life, particularly the life of a child, obligations are created that extend beyond simple gratitude or material compensation. Maggie felt a flutter of apprehension at his words, remembering similar statements he had made during their previous conversations. The concept of honor debts appeared to carry weight within Kiowa culture that transcended her understanding of social obligations, creating expectations and responsibilities that might prove difficult to navigate. You have told me that no debt exists, Walking Bear continued, but this cannot change the reality of what has occurred. My son lives because of your courage. His future children will exist because you opened your door during the storm. The continuation of my bloodline depends on your actions during that night. The magnitude of how he viewed her role in recent events struck her with unexpected force. She had acted instinctively to help a child in danger, but Walking Bear's perspective revealed implications that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. In saving Running Fox, she had apparently preserved something that carried profound significance within Kiowa concepts of family, continuity, and spiritual responsibility. Such debts, he explained, can only be addressed through responses that acknowledge their true importance, gifts or payment insult, rather than honor what has been given. Only actions of comparable significance can restore balance between those involved. The explanation created growing unease as Maggie began anticipating the direction of his communication. Honor debts that required responses of comparable significance suggested obligations that might exceed her ability or willingness to fulfill, potentially creating complications that could affect both their lives in unpredictable ways. Walking Bear rose from his chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape that had been the scene of his son's near-death experience and rescue. When he turned back toward her, his expression carried the solemnity of someone approaching a decision point that would determine the course of future events. I have consulted with the elders of my band, he said. I have sought guidance from the spirits through proper ceremonies. I have considered every aspect of our situation and the obligations that connect us. The formal tone suggested that whatever followed had been carefully planned and considered within the context of tribal traditions and spiritual requirements that she couldn't fully comprehend. His mention of elder consultation and spiritual guidance indicated that his approach involved more than personal decision-making, representing instead a community response to circumstances that had broader implications. The elders agree that your actions created bonds that cannot be ignored or dismissed, Walking Bear continued. They also recognize that you are alone in a dangerous place, without family protection or community support that women require for safety and prosperity. This observation surprised her, as she had worked hard to project competence and self-sufficiency in all her interactions with tribal members. The suggestion that her independence might be viewed as vulnerability rather than strength revealed cultural assumptions about women's roles and needs that differed significantly from her own perspective on her situation. Therefore, Walking Bear said, his voice carrying the weight of formal proclamation, I have come to offer marriage between us as the proper response to the debt I owe and the protection you deserve. The statement struck Maggie with stunning force, rendering her temporarily speechless as she processed implications that had never occurred to her despite their growing relationship. Marriage to Walking Bear would represent the ultimate crossing of cultural boundaries, creating a union that would challenge every convention governing interracial relationships in territorial society. Marriage, she managed to say, her voice reflecting the shock and confusion that his proposal had created. Yes, Walking Bear replied calmly, as though he had expected her reaction and prepared himself to address whatever concerns or questions his offer might generate. Among my people, marriage represents the highest form of alliance and protection. By taking you as my wife, I would honor the debt created by my son's rescue while providing you with the security and status that every woman deserves. The proposal's practical aspect struck her as forcefully as its emotional implications. Marriage to a Kiowa war chief would fundamentally alter her legal status, her relationship with white settler society, and her identity in ways that would affect every aspect of her future existence. She would become, in the eyes of territorial authorities and social conventions, an Indian squaw rather than an independent businesswoman. Yet Walking Bear's proposal also offered protections and opportunities that her current situation couldn't provide. Alliance with his band would ensure her safety from various threats that constantly endangered isolated frontier women, while access to tribal knowledge and resources could enhance her trading post's profitability and security. I understand that this offer surprises you, Walking Bear said, interpreting her silence correctly. It represents changes that would affect both our lives in ways that require careful consideration. Yes, Maggie replied, finding her voice. Again, it's not something I had ever considered or expected. Walking Bear nodded understandingly. Nor had I, until recent events revealed your character and created obligations that could not be addressed through ordinary means. But having observed your courage, your wisdom, and your kindness toward my son, I have come to believe that such a union would benefit both of us. He returned to his chair, settling himself with the patient demeanor of someone prepared for extended discussion of complex issues. Among my people, marriages are alliances between families and bands, not merely personal arrangements between individuals. By accepting my offer, you would gain the protection and support of my entire community, while bringing your own strengths and knowledge to our collective welfare. The explanation revealed cultural concepts of marriage that differed fundamentally from European American traditions, emphasizing romantic love and individual choice. Kiowa marriage apparently functioned as strategic alliance designed to enhance security, prosperity, and social stability through practical combination of complementary resources and capabilities. What would such a marriage mean for my trading? Post, Maggie asked, beginning to engage seriously with the proposal's practical implications. It would continue operating under our joint management, Walking Bear replied. Your knowledge of white trading practices, combined with my understanding of tribal needs and resources, could create opportunities for prosperity that neither of us could achieve alone. The business aspects of his proposal revealed careful thought about practical compatibility and mutual benefit that transcended simple romantic attraction or honor obligation. Walking Bear had apparently assessed their potential partnership from multiple perspectives, concluding that marriage would serve economic and strategic purposes as well as cultural requirements. And my relationship with white society, she continued. Walking Bear's expression grew more serious as he addressed what they both recognized as perhaps the most challenging aspect of his proposal. It would change significantly. Some whites would reject you for choosing an Indian husband. Others might fear or resent the alliance such a marriage would represent. His honesty about the social costs impressed her, as lesser men might have minimized difficulties in order to secure acceptance of their offers. Walking Bear's acknowledgement of potential hardships demonstrated respect for her intelligence and judgment, while revealing his own understanding of the complex racial dynamics that would affect their future. However, he added, you would gain respect and protection within tribal communities throughout the region. Your safety would become a matter of honor for warriors who now see you only as a useful trader. The proposal's security implications carried particular weight given recent events and her growing awareness of her vulnerable position as an isolated woman in contested territory. Marriage to Walking Bear would transform her from potential victim to protected family member within social systems that valued warrior loyalty and collective defense. I need time to consider your offer, Maggie said finally, recognizing that such a momentous decision required careful thought about implications that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. Of course, Walking Bear replied respectfully, such choices should not be made quickly or without full understanding of their consequences. I will return in 1 week for your answer. As he prepared to depart, Walking Bear's demeanor shifted subtly from formal proposal mode to something more personal and vulnerable. I should tell you, he said quietly, that my offer is not based only on honor debt or practical advantage. During the days we spent together during the storm, I came to respect and admire qualities in you that would make you a valued partner in any circumstance. The admission revealed emotional dimensions to his proposal that his formal presentation had not emphasized, suggesting that personal attraction and compatibility played roles alongside cultural obligation and strategic benefit. This acknowledgement transformed his offer from purely transactional arrangement to something approaching genuine romantic interest. Your courage, your intelligence, your compassion for my son, and your willingness to bridge differences between our peoples have shown me a woman whose partnership I would value greatly, he continued. If you accept my proposal, it will be as much for my personal happiness as for any debt or alliance it might create. After Walking Bear's departure, Maggie found herself confronting a decision that would determine the entire course of her future existence. His proposal represented the ultimate test of her courage and judgment, requiring her to choose between the familiar but increasingly precarious world of white frontier society and the unknown but potentially rewarding realm of cross-cultural marriage and tribal alliance. The week that followed passed in a blur of contemplation, self-examination, and practical assessment of alternatives. She considered the loneliness that had characterized her life since James's death, the growing hostility she faced from white society due to her Indian sympathies, and the limited prospects available to an independent woman in territorial society. Against these factors, she weighed the unknowns associated with marriage to Walking Bear, the cultural adjustments required, the challenges of raising children between two worlds, the political implications of such a union during a period of increasing racial tension. Yet as she reflected on their interactions during the storm crisis and its aftermath, Maggie realized that her respect and affection for Walking Bear had grown beyond simple friendship or business association. His intelligence, integrity, and genuine concern for her welfare had revealed qualities that would make him an appealing partner, regardless of the cultural complications their union might create. More significantly, she recognized that his proposal offered opportunities for personal growth and contribution to intercultural understanding that her current existence could never provide. Marriage to Walking Bear would position her to serve as a bridge between communities, using her unique perspective and relationships to promote cooperation rather than conflict. When Walking Bear returned exactly 1 week later, arriving at sunset, as golden light painted the prairie in warm hues that seemed to promise spring's eventual triumph over winter's harshness, Maggie was ready with her answer. "I accept your proposal," she said simply, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that reflected her conviction about the choice she had made. The transformation in Walking Bear's expression revealed the depth of emotion he had concealed during their previous conversations. Relief, joy, and anticipation combined in a smile that illuminated his weathered features and revealed the man behind the diplomatic facade he typically presented to the world. "You honor me greatly," he replied, his formal words inadequate to express the feelings that his expression revealed more clearly than any language could convey. As they began planning the practical aspects of their union, Maggie realized she was embarking on an adventure that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, marriage, and her own capacity for adaptation and growth. The storm that had brought Running Fox to her door had ultimately brought her something she had never expected to find. A chance at happiness that transcended the boundaries others used to define the limits of human connection. Spring arrived, early that year, as though nature itself celebrated the union between two worlds that had seemed destined for eternal conflict. By mid-March, the prairie had awakened from winter's grip with an explosion of wildflowers that painted the landscape in brilliant yellows, blues, and reds that seemed to mock the harsh white desolation that had dominated the territory for months. The Arkansas River ran full and clear, fed by melting snow from distant mountains, while migrating birds returned in vast numbers that darkened the sky with their passage overhead. The wedding ceremony itself had been a marvel of cultural synthesis that satisfied both Kiowa traditions and Maggie's need for familiar elements from her own heritage. Walking Bear had collaborated with Reverend Matthews from Fort Land to create a dual celebration that honored both sets of customs, without compromising the essential meaning of either culture attached to marriage as sacred commitment and social alliance. The Christian portion of the ceremony took place at the trading post on a warm April morning, with Reverend Matthews performing a simple but dignified service, attended by the handful of white settlers who had maintained friendly relations with Maggie despite her controversial choice. Mrs. Henderson from the nearby German farm served as witness, while her husband provided musical accompaniment on his accordion that added unexpected charm to the proceedings. The Kiowa ceremony followed that evening, conducted in the sheltered valley where Walking Bear's band had established their seasonal camp. Singing Crow, the elderly spiritual leader who had shared stories during their storm-bound days, officiated with rituals that dated back generations in tribal tradition. The ceremony included elements that fascinated Maggie. the sacred pipe ceremony that blessed their union, the exchange of gifts that symbolized their commitment to mutual support, and the formal presentation to the assembled tribe that established her new status within their community. Most moving was the role running fox, played in both ceremonies, serving as symbol of the bond that had brought his father and adoptive mother together. During the Christian service, he carried the simple gold ring that Walking Bear placed on Maggie's finger. In the tribal ceremony, he presented her with a necklace of elk teeth and turquoise that had belonged to Walking Bear's grandmother, marking her acceptance into the family lineage with honor that transcended mere marriage convenience. The practical integration of their lives proved both more challenging and more rewarding than either had anticipated. Maggie's trading post, now enhanced by Walking Bear's knowledge of tribal needs and seasonal patterns, evolved into something, approaching a diplomatic center where different communities could interact safely. The business thrived as never before, serving not only traditional customers but also tribal members who had previously traded elsewhere due to cultural barriers or geographic inconvenience. Walking Bear brought to their partnership an understanding of complex trade networks that extended far beyond Maggie's previous knowledge. His connections with Comanche bands to the south, Cheyenne groups to the north, and Apache traders from the southwest opened opportunities for exotic goods and expanded markets that increased their inventory's diversity and profitability. Rare items like turquoise from New Mexico, silverwork from Mexican artisans, and buffalo robes of exceptional quality commanded premium prices from customers who had never seen such merchandise at frontier trading posts. More significantly, their marriage created a safe, neutral ground where members of different tribes could conduct business without the territorial disputes that sometimes complicated inter-tribal trade. Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne traders who might view each other with suspicion in other contexts could meet at the trading post under the protection of Walking Bear's guarantee of safe passage and Maggie's reputation for fair dealing. The arrangement benefited white settlers as well, though many initially viewed it with suspicion that gradually gave way to appreciation for its practical advantages. Farmers and ranchers discovered that tribal members offered valuable services like seasonal labor, expert tracking for lost livestock, and detailed knowledge of weather patterns that could mean the difference between successful harvests and devastating losses. Dr. Williams, a physician who had established practice in the growing town of Clearwater, 20 miles east, began regular visits to treat both white and tribal patients who gathered at the trading post for medical care that bridged different healing traditions. His collaboration with tribal medicine men like Singing Crow created innovative treatments that combined European medical knowledge with traditional plant medicines and healing techniques. These developments attracted attention from territorial authorities who initially viewed the unusual arrangement with deep suspicion. Governor Patterson dispatched investigators to assess whether the trading post represented a security threat or violation of federal policies governing Indian relations. Their reports, however, consistently praised the stability and prosperity that Walking Bear and Maggie's partnership had brought to a previously volatile region. Colonel Morrison, the new commander at Fort Larned, proved more enlightened than his predecessor about the benefits of peaceful coexistence. His visits to the trading post convinced him that their intercultural alliance served military interests by providing intelligence about tribal movements, early warning of potential conflicts, and diplomatic channels that could diffuse tensions before they escalated into violence. What you've accomplished here, he told them during one such visit, represents the future of frontier development. Cooperation rather than conquest, mutual benefit instead of zero-sum competition. The validation from military and civilian authorities helped establish their legitimacy within white society, though individual prejudices remained difficult to overcome. Some settlers continued viewing Maggie as a traitor to her race, while certain tribal members questioned Walking Bear's loyalty to traditional ways. Yet the tangible benefits their partnership provided gradually won over most skeptics on both sides. Their personal relationship flourished alongside their business success. The mutual respect and admiration that had led to their marriage deepened into genuine love that transcended cultural differences through daily shared experiences and common goals. Walking Bear's intelligence and integrity made him an ideal partner for someone of Maggie's independence and capability, while her adaptability and courage earned his admiration as qualities essential for life in their challenging environment. Running, Fox thrived under their joint care, developing into a remarkable young man who embodied the best qualities of both cultures. His education included traditional tribal skills like hunting, tracking, and horseback riding alongside academic subjects that Maggie taught using books acquired through her expanded trade networks. By age 12, he could translate fluently between Kiowa and English, negotiate business deals with traders from both communities, and demonstrate survival skills that impressed even experienced frontier veterans. More importantly, Running Fox served as living proof that cultural integration could produce individuals capable of bridging different worlds without losing their essential identity. His comfort in both environments made him a natural diplomat who could facilitate understanding between groups that might otherwise remain suspicious of each other's motivations and customs. The first major test of their intercultural experiment came during the summer of 1876, when drought conditions created competition for water resources that threatened to trigger conflicts between various tribal groups and white settlers. Traditional responses to such crises typically involved armed confrontation, as different communities fought for control of scarce resources essential for survival. Instead, Walking Bear and Maggie organized a regional conference that brought together representatives from all affected parties to negotiate sharing agreements based on mutual need rather than superior force. The negotiations, conducted at their trading post over several days, produced compromises that allowed everyone to survive the drought while establishing precedents for future cooperation during similar emergencies. The success of these negotiations attracted national attention from journalists and government officials interested in peaceful solutions to frontier conflicts. Harper's Weekly published a feature article about their innovative approach to intercultural relations, while the Bureau of Indian Affairs requested detailed reports about their methods for potential application in other troubled regions. Such recognition brought both opportunities and challenges. Increased visibility attracted more customers and trading partners, but also drew attention from individuals and groups opposed to racial integration. Anonymous threats appeared occasionally, while political opponents of territorial integration policies used their relationship as evidence of dangerous precedents that could undermine white supremacy throughout the West. More personally challenging were the internal conflicts that arose as their success created expectations and pressures neither had anticipated. Some tribal members expected Walking Bear to use his influence with white authorities to gain advantages for Kiowa interests, while certain white traders demanded preferential treatment based on racial solidarity. Navigating these competing demands required diplomatic skills that tested both their individual judgment and marital partnership. Their response demonstrated the maturity and wisdom that had made their union successful despite its unconventional nature. Rather than favoring either side, they maintained strict neutrality that emphasized fairness and mutual benefit over ethnic loyalty. This approach disappointed some supporters, but ultimately strengthened their reputation for integrity and reliability among reasonable people from all communities. The birth of their first child in the spring of 1877 marked another milestone in their remarkable journey. Little Sarah, named for her mother, but given the Kiowa name Bright Star, represented the literal embodiment of two cultures united in harmony. Her mixed heritage could have made her an outcast in either society, but the respect her parents had earned created acceptance that transcended traditional prejudices. Bright Star's upbringing became a carefully planned experiment in bicultural education that attracted observation from educators and social reformers interested in alternatives to forced assimilation policies. She learned English and Kiowa simultaneously, absorbed both Christian and traditional spiritual teachings, and developed skills valued in both communities without being forced to choose between competing identities. More children followed. Thomas, Walking Bear in 1879, named for Maggie's first husband and his adoptive father. Running Deer in 1881, a daughter whose grace and intelligence reflected the best of both parents. And finally, Little Wolf in 1883, whose arrival completed their family while cementing their legacy as pioneers of successful intercultural integration. Each child grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable in tribal lodges and frontier towns, capable of navigating complex social dynamics that would have challenged adults from either single cultural background. Their education combined traditional tribal knowledge with academic subjects, practical frontier skills with cultural appreciation, preparing them for lives that would continue bridging different worlds as American society evolved beyond simple racial categories. The trading post itself underwent constant expansion and improvement to accommodate their growing family and expanding business operations. What had begun as Maggie's modest frontier establishment evolved into a complex that included the original store, a residence that blended architectural elements from both cultures, workshops where tribal artisans could produce goods for white customers, and meeting spaces where different communities could gather for trade, negotiation, and social interaction. Walking Bear's contributions to the complex included traditional elements like a sweat lodge for purification ceremonies and a circular council area where tribal meetings could be conducted according to customary protocols. These additions served practical purposes while demonstrating respect for indigenous traditions that many white settlements ignored or actively suppressed. The success of their partnership inspired similar experiments throughout the region, though few achieved comparable results due to lack of the personal qualities and favorable circumstances that had made their union possible. Other interracial marriages faced greater hostility from both communities, while business partnerships between tribal and white traders often founded on cultural misunderstandings or conflicting expectations about profit sharing and decision-making. Authority, yet their example provided hope and practical guidance for individuals brave enough to attempt similar bridges between cultures. Visitors came from hundreds of miles away to observe their methods and seek advice about implementing comparable arrangements in other locations. Some succeeded in establishing smaller-scale versions of their model, while others adapted elements that could work within their specific circumstances and communities. The broader historical context of their success became increasingly significant as federal Indian policy shifted toward more coercive assimilation programs during the 1880s. The establishment of boarding schools designed to kill the Indian and save the man represented a philosophy directly opposed to their demonstration that cultural integration could preserve valuable elements from both traditions while creating something new and valuable. Their children became living arguments against forced assimilation, proving that bicultural education could produce individuals who contributed positively to both communities without losing essential aspects of their heritage. Educational reformers and religious leaders increasingly cited their family as evidence that alternatives to cultural destruction existed for those willing to invest the patience and wisdom required for genuine integration. Walking Bear's role in these broader debates evolved from local leader to regional spokesman for moderate approaches to Indian-white relations. His articulate presentations to government officials, combined with the tangible evidence of success represented by his family and business, provided powerful counter-arguments to advocates of purely punitive policies toward tribal populations. Maggie's perspective proved equally valuable in discussions with white women's organizations and religious groups interested in civilizing influences on frontier society. Her ability to describe positive aspects of tribal culture while maintaining credibility within white social circles helped counteract stereotypes that portrayed all indigenous customs as savage or degraded. Their joint presentations at conferences and meetings throughout the region challenged audiences to reconsider assumptions about racial differences and cultural compatibility. The obvious love and respect between them, combined with their children's evident success in both academic and traditional pursuits, provided convincing evidence that prejudice rather than inherent incompatibility created most barriers between communities. As the 1880s progressed and territorial status gave way to statehood preparations, Walking Bear and Maggie found themselves increasingly involved in political discussions about the future of interracial relations in the emerging state. Their experience provided unique perspective on practical questions about voting rights, property ownership, educational systems, and legal frameworks that could accommodate cultural diversity within democratic institutions. Their advocacy for inclusive policies faced significant opposition from white supremacist groups and tribal traditionalists who preferred complete separation to partial integration. Yet their demonstrated success in creating mutually beneficial relationships attracted support from moderate voices in both communities who recognized the advantages of cooperation over continued conflict. The establishment of their trading post as an unofficial embassy between cultures created precedents that influenced broader policy discussions about economic development, resource management, and social organization in the developing state. Government officials increasingly consulted them about practical aspects of implementing policies that required cooperation between different ethnic communities. Their children's educational achievements became particularly significant as debates intensified about the capabilities and potential of mixed-race individuals. Little Sarah's acceptance at a prestigious Eastern women's college, Thomas Walking Bear's success in agricultural studies, Running Deer's artistic talents, and Little Wolf's mechanical aptitude challenged assumptions about genetic limitations and cultural barriers that many used to justify discriminatory policies. The trading post's evolution into a regional center for intercultural commerce demonstrated economic benefits of cooperation that appealed to business interests regardless of their social prejudices. The unique goods and services available there attracted customers from throughout the region, generating tax revenue and employment opportunities that contributed significantly to local economic development. More subtly, their success influenced social attitudes by providing positive examples of interracial interaction for individuals who might never have encountered such relationships otherwise. Children who grew up seeing their family as normal neighbors developed different assumptions about racial compatibility than those raised in completely segregated environments. As the 19th century drew toward its close, Walking Bear and Maggie could look back on achievements that exceeded their most optimistic expectations when they first decided to unite their lives. Their marriage had evolved from practical alliance into deep partnership. Their business had grown from modest trading post into regional institution, and their family had become living proof that cultural boundaries could be transcended without destroying the valuable heritage each tradition contributed. Yet their greatest legacy lay not in personal success, but in the broader transformation they had helped catalyze throughout their region. The network of relationships, institutions, and precedents that had grown around their initial partnership created a foundation for continued cooperation that would outlast their individual contributions. Running Fox, now a young man of 23, had established his own trading operation that extended their model into new territories. His marriage to a mixed-blood Cherokee woman created another bridge between tribal communities while producing grandchildren who would carry forward the integration experiment into yet another generation. Their biological children were pursuing paths that would further expand intercultural possibilities. Little Sarah working as a teacher who specialized in bilingual education, Thomas Walking Bear developing agricultural techniques that combined traditional and modern farming methods, Running Deer creating art that celebrated both cultural heritages, and Little Wolf inventing mechanical solutions to problems that affected both farming and traditional hunting economies. The trading post itself had become an institution that would continue serving intercultural needs regardless of changes in ownership or management. The buildings, relationships, and operational procedures they had developed created infrastructure for continued cooperation that had become integral to the region's economic and social fabric. Most significantly, their example had inspired a generation of individuals who approached cultural differences with curiosity rather than fear, seeking opportunities for mutual benefit rather than assuming zero-sum competition. The children who had grown up around their trading post carried different assumptions about racial relations into adult lives that would shape the emerging state's social development. As Walking Bear and Maggie celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1895, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and representatives from multiple communities whose lives had been enriched by their partnership, they could see the broader legacy of that stormy night when a lost Kiowa boy had knocked on a widow's door seeking shelter. The simple act of compassion that had begun their relationship had rippled outward through years of patient work, courageous choices, and mutual dedication to create changes that extended far beyond their individual circumstances. They had proven that cultural boundaries, however ancient and seemingly absolute, could be transcended by individuals willing to risk conventional safety for the possibility of something greater. Their story became legend throughout the region, told and retold by people who had witnessed their transformation from unlikely allies to successful partners to beloved community leaders. Children heard it as an example of courage rewarded. Adults cited it as proof that cooperation benefited everyone, and elderly residents remembered it as evidence that individual choices could reshape entire communities. The winter storm that had brought Running Fox to Maggie's door had indeed changed everything, but not in ways anyone could have predicted. What began as a crisis had become an opportunity. What started as obligation had evolved into love, and what seemed like an ending had proved to be a beginning that would continue influencing lives and communities for generations to come. In saving one child from the cold, Maggie Fletcher had ultimately saved herself, her community, and countless others from the spiritual cold of prejudice and fear that separated people who might otherwise discover their common humanity. The warmth she had shared on that desperate night had spread to kindle fires of understanding that would burn long after the storms of their era had passed into memory. However, their path to success had not been without significant obstacles that tested both their resolve and their partnership in ways neither had anticipated. The summer of 1887 brought their most serious crisis when territorial politics shifted dramatically following the election of Governor Harrison, a former military officer whose campaign had promised to restore order to Indian-white relations. Through stricter enforcement of federal policies, The new administration viewed their trading post's success with deep suspicion, interpreting their intercultural cooperation as a potential threat to established racial hierarchies. Agent Morrison, appointed to oversee tribal affairs in their region, arrived with explicit instructions to investigate what his superiors termed unauthorized fraternization between white settlers and indigenous populations. Morrison's investigation began subtly, with seemingly routine inspections of their business records and trading permits. His questions gradually became more pointed, focusing on the extent of tribal access to weapons, ammunition, and other materials that could theoretically be used against white settlements. The agents' obvious hostility created tension that affected not only their business operations, but also the carefully built trust between different communities that gathered at their establishment. More troubling were Morrison's private conversations with tribal members, during which he suggested that Walking Bear's marriage to a white woman represented betrayal of traditional values and abandonment of his people's interests. These divide-and-conquer tactics, employed successfully in other regions, threatened to undermine the unity that had made their partnership effective in bridging cultural differences. The crisis deepened when Morrison filed formal complaints alleging that the trading post violated federal regulations governing commerce between white citizens and tribal members. His charges, while legally questionable, carried sufficient official weight to trigger investigations by multiple government agencies, whose overlapping jurisdictions created bureaucratic chaos that paralyzed their operations for months. Walking Bear's response to these challenges revealed the depth of wisdom and strategic thinking that had made him an effective leader throughout his career. Rather than responding defensively to Morrison's accusations, he initiated a coordinated campaign that demonstrated the broad support their partnership enjoyed among both white and tribal communities throughout the region. Letters of support poured in from customers, suppliers, and community leaders who had witnessed firsthand the benefits of their intercultural cooperation. Dr. Williams testified about the medical advances achieved through collaboration between traditional and modern healing practices. Colonel Morrison's successor at Fort Larned provided a military assessment that their trading post had contributed significantly to regional stability by providing peaceful alternatives to armed conflict. Most compelling was the testimony of their children, now young adults, whose achievements provided living evidence of successful cultural integration. Little Sarah's academic honors at college, Thomas Walking Bear's innovations in agricultural techniques, Running Deer's artistic recognition, and Little Wolf's mechanical inventions demonstrated capabilities that challenged every stereotype about mixed-race limitations. The investigation's outcome surprised even their supporters when federal authorities not only cleared them of all charges, but officially designated their trading post as a model facility for intercultural commerce. Morrison was transferred to another territory, while his replacement, Agent Patterson, proved far more sympathetic to cooperative approaches to tribal relations. This victory, however, came at significant personal cost. The stress of months under investigation had affected Maggie's health, while Walking Bear struggled with depression caused by attacks on his character and loyalty from people he had considered friends. Their children faced harassment at school and social ostracism that tested their resilience and commitment to their bicultural identity. The family's response to these challenges strengthened their bonds while revealing character depths that impressed even their enemies. Rather than retreating into defensive isolation, they increased their community outreach efforts, hosting cultural exchange events that brought together people who might otherwise never interact positively across racial lines. Running Fox's marriage. To star dancing, the Cherokee woman he had met during a trading expedition to Indian Territory created another dimension to their family's intercultural experiment. Star dancing brought knowledge of Cherokee agricultural techniques and textile arts that complemented the skills already represented in their extended family, while her gentle nature and diplomatic abilities made her an ideal partner for running Fox's expanding business ventures. Their wedding, celebrated with ceremonies from 3 different traditions, became a regional event that attracted visitors from hundreds of miles away. The Cherokee delegation that accompanied star dancing included respected leaders whose presence demonstrated the growing network of alliances that Walking Bear and Maggie's example had inspired throughout Indian Territory. The couple's first child, born in 1889 and named Little Star for both grandmothers, represented the 3rd generation of successful cultural blending. Her upbringing incorporated elements from Kiowa, Cherokee, and Anglo-American traditions, while avoiding the conflicts that might have resulted from competing loyalties or incompatible expectations. Running Fox's business acumen, enhanced by his multicultural perspective and language skills, enabled him to establish trading relationships that extended from Mexico to Canada. His fluency in 5 different languages, combined with deep understanding of various cultural protocols, made him an invaluable intermediary for complex negotiations that required sensitivity to diverse perspectives and customs. His success inspired other young men from mixed backgrounds to pursue similar careers, creating a generation of intercultural businessmen whose activities gradually normalized cooperation between communities that had previously viewed each other with suspicion or hostility. These developments occurred largely outside official government policy, representing grassroots economic integration that proved more durable than politically motivated programs. Star dancing's contributions to the family enterprise focused on textile production and women's education. Her knowledge of Cherokee weaving techniques, combined with Kiowa beadwork traditions and Anglo-American textile manufacturing, created unique products that commanded premium prices in both local and distant markets. More significantly, she established educational programs for women from all backgrounds who wanted to learn skills that could provide economic independence. Her classes in weaving, sewing, food preservation, and business management attracted students from tribal communities and white settlements, creating learning environments where cultural exchange occurred naturally through shared practical activities. These programs produced a generation of women who possessed both traditional domestic skills and modern business capabilities, enabling them to support their families while maintaining cultural connections that might otherwise have been lost through forced assimilation pressures. The success of star dancing's graduates provided compelling evidence that education could preserve cultural heritage while preparing people for participation in changing economic systems. Little Wolf's mechanical aptitude, evident from early childhood, developed into engineering capabilities that revolutionized several aspects of frontier life. His inventions, which combined traditional indigenous knowledge with modern mechanical principles, addressed practical problems that affected both farming and traditional hunting economies. His most significant innovation was an improved windmill design that incorporated wind-reading techniques learned from tribal weather forecasters. The resulting machines operated more efficiently than standard models while requiring less maintenance, making them practical for isolated locations where repair services were unavailable. Little Wolf's understanding of traditional hunting methods enabled him to design improved traps and hunting equipment that increased efficiency while reducing waste, addressing conservation concerns that were becoming increasingly important as wildlife populations declined due to commercial exploitation. His designs were adopted by both tribal hunters and white trappers, demonstrating practical benefits of combining different knowledge systems. His workshop at the trading post became an informal engineering school where young men from various backgrounds could learn mechanical skills while contributing to ongoing innovation projects. This hands-on education produced a generation of technically skilled individuals who could maintain and improve the machinery that frontier communities increasingly depended upon for survival and prosperity. The workshop's success attracted attention from industrial manufacturers who hired Little Wolf as a consultant for developing products suitable for frontier conditions. His recommendations, based on deep understanding of actual user needs and environmental challenges, improved the reliability and effectiveness of everything from plows to mining equipment. These consulting relationships created income streams that supported the trading post during economic downturns, while establishing Little Wolf's reputation as an innovative engineer whose mixed cultural background provided a unique perspective on technological challenges. His success challenged stereotypes about intellectual capabilities while demonstrating practical benefits of cultural diversity in problem-solving approaches. Little Sarah's career as an educator began with her recognition that standard educational approaches failed to serve children from diverse cultural backgrounds effectively. Her own experience navigating different educational systems had revealed both strengths and weaknesses in various pedagogical methods, inspiring her to develop innovative teaching techniques that accommodated different learning styles and cultural perspectives. Her experimental school, established near the trading post in 1892, attracted students from tribal communities, white settlements, and mixed families throughout the region. The curriculum included standard academic subjects taught through methods that incorporated storytelling traditions, hands-on learning activities, and collaborative projects that reflected different cultural approaches to knowledge transmission. The school's success rate, measured by both academic achievement and cultural confidence among graduates, exceeded that of traditional institutions by significant margins. Students learned to read and write in multiple languages while developing appreciation for diverse cultural traditions that prepared them for success in an increasingly multicultural society. Little Sarah's teaching methods attracted attention from educational reformers throughout the country who were seeking alternatives to rigid, culturally destructive approaches that characterized many government-funded Indian schools. Her publications about bilingual education and cultural preservation influenced policy discussions at national levels while providing practical guidance for teachers working with diverse student populations. Her marriage to Dr. James Whitehorse, a mixed-blood physician who had graduated from Harvard Medical School, created another powerful example of successful professional achievement by individuals from multicultural backgrounds. Their partnership combined medical practice with educational innovation, establishing clinics and schools that served underserved populations throughout the territory. Their children, born in the 1890s, represented the fourth generation of successful cultural integration, growing up with advantages and opportunities that had been unimaginable when their great-grandmother first opened her door to a freezing Kiowa child during that terrible winter storm decades earlier. By the 1890s, the economic impact of Walking Bear and Maggie's partnership extended far beyond their immediate trading post operations. The network of relationships, suppliers, and customers they had developed created economic activity that supported hundreds of families throughout the region, while generating tax revenue that funded schools, roads, and other infrastructure improvements. Their success had inspired similar ventures throughout the territory, though few achieved comparable results due to the unique combination of circumstances, personalities, and timing that had made their partnership possible. Nevertheless, even partially successful imitations contributed to gradual normalization of intercultural cooperation in business relationships. The agricultural innovations promoted through their trading post, particularly Thomas Walking Bear's development of drought-resistant crops and soil conservation techniques, increased farming productivity throughout the region while reducing environmental degradation that had threatened long-term sustainability of agricultural development. These improvements attracted settlers who might otherwise have avoided the area due to challenging farming conditions, increasing population density that supported additional businesses and services. The resulting economic growth created employment, opportunities that benefited both white and tribal communities while reducing economic competition that had previously contributed to racial tensions. Their trading post's role as unofficial banking center, providing credit and financial services to customers who lacked access to formal banking institutions, facilitated economic development that might otherwise have been impossible due to capital shortages. Their reputation for fair dealing and cultural sensitivity made them trusted intermediaries for complex financial transactions that required confidence from parties with different cultural backgrounds and business practices. Walking Bear's evolution, from tribal chief to regional political leader, reflected broader changes in how intercultural relationships were developing throughout the American West. His ability to represent tribal interests while maintaining credibility with white political leaders made him an increasingly important voice in policy discussions about statehood preparations and the future of Indian-white relations. His testimony before congressional committees investigating frontier conditions provided lawmakers with perspectives that challenged simplistic assumptions about racial capabilities and cultural compatibility. His articulate presentations, supported by documentation of his family's and community's achievements, influenced legislation that recognized greater rights for tribal members while establishing frameworks for continued cultural preservation. Maggie's parallel influence within women's organizations and religious groups provided another channel for policy advocacy that complemented Walking Bear's more formal political activities. Her speeches about successful intercultural cooperation challenged audiences to reconsider assumptions about racial differences while providing practical examples of alternatives to forced assimilation policies. Their joint advocacy contributed to gradual shifts in federal Indian policy that emphasized cooperation rather than conquest, education rather than destruction of cultural heritage, and economic development rather than welfare dependency. While these changes occurred slowly and incompletely, their influence on policy discussions was significant and lasting. The precedents established through their successful partnership provided legal and political frameworks that other intercultural families could use to protect their rights and interests. Court cases that reference their example established principles about property rights, citizenship status, and educational opportunities that benefited subsequent generations of mixed families. As the 19th century drew to its close, the full scope of Walking Bear and Maggie's legacy became apparent through the lives and achievements of the hundreds of individuals whose opportunities had been expanded through their example and efforts. The children they had taught, the businesses they had inspired, the policies they had influenced, and the attitudes they had changed created ripple effects that extended far beyond their immediate community. Their story became part of regional folklore, told and retold in ways that emphasized different aspects depending on the teller's perspective and audience's needs. To some, it represented the triumph of love over prejudice. To others, it demonstrated the economic benefits of cooperation over conflict. To others, it proved that cultural differences could be sources of strength rather than division. The trading post itself evolved into a historic site that attracted visitors from throughout the country who came to learn about successful approaches to intercultural relations. The buildings, artifacts, and documents preserved there provided tangible evidence of what could be accomplished when individuals had the courage to cross cultural boundaries in pursuit of mutual understanding and benefit. Their descendants continued, carrying forward the integration experiment into the 20th century, adapting their ancestors' principles to new challenges and opportunities that arose as American society continued evolving. Each generation found ways to preserve valuable cultural heritage while participating fully in broader social and economic development. Their legacy lived on, not only in their biological and adopted descendants, but in the countless individuals who had learned from their example that cultural boundaries, however ancient and seemingly absolute, could be transcended by those willing to risk conventional safety for the possibility of something greater than themselves. The warmth that Maggie had shared on that desperate winter night continued spreading through generations, kindling fires of understanding that would illuminate paths toward justice and reconciliation long after the original participants had passed into memory and legend. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.